Hey everybody, I'm Mike Settele, the founder of Settele Tutoring, and in this video, I'm going to help you interpret your PSAT scores. What do they mean? Are they good? Are they bad? What do you do next? Specifically, I hope to answer these three questions for you. Should you take the SAT? When should you take the SAT? And how do you prepare for the SAT? But this is just an overview. There are going to be places where I'm going to say that the answer is a little bit more complicated, and the best way to get that more complicated explanation is to either go to my website or to subscribe to my channel. Both are going to have more videos with more detailed explanations. And if you are taking the SAT, then my YouTube channel is the best place to start. I've got a 10-episode strategy series that will get the ball rolling for you on the main ideas for the test. But let's just review very quickly what the PSAT means. Hopefully this is not new information to you. The one thing I really want to emphasize is that the PSAT doesn't count. It is just basically a practice test that you can use to see where your starting point would be for the SAT. Most of you who are watching this video are probably doing so in November because your counselor just handed you your scores, or you got an email telling you to log into the College Board account and figure out what these numbers mean. So hopefully I can put this in some sort of context for you. The top line number is the total score. Now on a PSAT, this number is out of 1520. That's the maximum score, but you probably know that the SAT itself is out of 1600. I don't know why the SAT and PSAT are different. The College Board has decided to do this. I find it very confusing. And since the SAT and PSAT are supposed to be a one-to-one comparison, we can just pretend that this number is out of 1600. Basically, this student, if they took an SAT tomorrow, is probably very likely to get a 1210. So the PSAT score is meant to correspond to what an SAT score would be. So let's just think of it that way for simplicity's sake. Now, the 1210 doesn't mean a lot to me as a tutor because there's lots of ways to get a 1210. So what I would want to know is the two subject scores that made this up. So this student got a 640 in reading and writing and a 570 in math. And again, these numbers are out of a weird 760, but for simplicity's sake, we can think of them as SAT scores out of 800. And these three numbers are very easy to relate. The two subject scores added together give us the total score. So not a whole lot of math involved in the PSAT scores. Now, there will be these other numbers. They're going to give you the percentiles for each of these, and that might help put it in context. I'll do a little bit more contextualizing in a second, but if you log into the College Board website, you're going to see a bunch more numbers. They're going to compare you to other demographics. They're going to give you these benchmarks that are meant to show like where you are for college readiness. I don't think they're very helpful. And then for some people, this might matter. The National Merit Scholarship qualifying test also is the PSAT, and if you score really, really high on the PSAT, you do have a chance at some scholarship money. You can see there's a reformulation here of the top number scores, but for most people this isn't going to matter. Really, that number needs to be like a 220 or a 215 maybe to have any sort of qualification here, and if you do qualify, they will tell you. So this student at a 185, completely ignore this. So let's put these scores in context. Are these good or are these bad? I tend to think of the subject scores out of 800 in terms of what 100 they're in. And you can see there are percentiles that correspond and kind of give us a sense of whether or not they're good. But my analysis is that 800, yes, is perfect. 700s are excellent. 600s are good. 500s are average. And yes, to put it bluntly, the 400s are bad. But remember, this is a starting score. So you have every opportunity with practice to improve. And in my experience, it's very typical for students who practice to move up one notch in this table. So if you're at the 500s, you can practice and it's good odds that you'll get into the 600s. If you work really hard and get a little lucky, you might get into the 700s. It does happen, but it is not guaranteed. So what does this mean? Should you take the SAT? Well, if you are already at a 600 in a subject, then yeah, you probably should take the SAT because with practice, that will improve hopefully into the 700s. So that would be some really good scores that you'd be proud of and would want to put on your college applications. On the other hand, if you're in the 400s or lower, that's not really great. And since most schools are test optional right now, you don't need SAT scores to apply to most colleges. So preparing is doable. You can improve it, but even if you moved up two notches from the 400s, you're in the 6s. And so what is that? That's kind of like a slightly above average score. How much time and effort is that worth? It might not be worth it if you've already got good grades and extracurriculars and all that other stuff. So just keep that in mind. Now, some of you may have to take the SAT anyway because you do want to apply to a school that requires it, or maybe you need it for a scholarship, some merit aid, some program, some sport, who knows? So regardless, again, this is a starting point. You need to improve. But whether you take the test or not, if you are scoring in the 400s, I want you to ask yourself why. Some people just say, oh, I'm not a good test taker, but I don't buy it. Why aren't you a good test taker? In my experience, most people who are starting in that place, whether they think they're good at test taking or not, also have some fundamental weaknesses. They don't know how to do algebra. They're not reading at grade level. And since college and working life are right on the horizon, you might want to figure out why your score is so low compared to your peers. That might be something you can prepare for and remedy before you go out and graduate high school. But let's move on to this kind of student here who has a 1210, which is decent, but not amazing. What would I expect this student to accomplish? They're kind of in that average zone, and whether they take the test might have a lot to do with just like what their schedule is like, how much they want it, how motivated they are. But with practice, I think it's safe to say that we could get this student into the 700 level for reading and writing, which would be the 93rd percentile. That's pretty good. The math, I'd be pretty happy with like a 650. That might be a little bit of a reach, but still that would be an 85th percentile, pretty good. And that would get us an overall score of 1350. So that would be respectable. That is a kind of number that you're going to send to most colleges. Even the most competitive colleges might like this kind of number as a backup to some other great things on your application. So that is definitely a score to be proud of. So just looking at that, I do think that this student has some potential to get some really great SAT scores. Now we can look a little bit more deeply at the score report. There is this knowledge and skills section for each subject. This can be a little hard to scrutinize unless you're a tutor, and even me, I'm kind of just making some guesses as to what this might mean. Really, what I would want is the actual test questions to know what this student is specifically getting wrong. But in this case, I can kind of make some judgments here. I'm going to have another video that goes into way more detail about what each of these categories means, but basically they kind of correspond to these kind of logic argument questions, some vocab questions, the expression of ideas are these kind of easy questions at the end of the section, and then standard English conventions is just a fancy way of saying grammar. So looking at this student, my first instinct is maybe their pacing was off. Because if they're missing a lot of those easy questions, maybe they just ran out of time. They're at the end of the section, so that might be an easy place to improve. But again, that's just a guess. I don't really know for sure. If I look at the skills for math, these mostly correspond to the math classes that most high school students take. Algebra 1, Algebra 2, Statistics, and Geometry. And the first question I would ask the student is, what math class are you in right now? Because look at that Algebra 2 number. If they're in Algebra 2 right now, then that explains why that's so low. They took the PSAT in October. There's so many topics that they haven't even learned yet. So just kind of waiting it out for a couple more months and then reviewing it before the first test, that might improve that score pretty easily. And so maybe that 570 isn't as bad as it looks. But again, that's just a lot of guessing. I don't really know what's going on in there, and so it's hard to tell. But for a student like this, I probably would say if you have the time and you want to put in the effort, this might be a good test for you to take because you can end up with some pretty good numbers. So if you decide to take the test, when are you going to take it? What does this schedule look like? The SAT is offered 7 times a year, the beginning of March, May, and June, the end of August, and the beginning of October, November, and December. Now, there is an in-school SAT that is offered in some school districts across the United States. That happens anytime between March and April, and so that's a wide window there. I'll talk more about that in a second. But for everybody across the board, the main thing to think about when you're planning out your SATs is when will you have the time to study? You want to take this test when you can actually put in the time to practice. Otherwise, you're just going to get the same scores that you got on the PSAT. So you need to improve them if you want to actually have some good numbers. My recommendation is that you should start prep in January for the March SAT, and then when school ends in June, start prep for the August SAT. Now, we're skipping over May and June because those tests happen to fall when you have a lot of AP exams and finals, and adding an SAT into that mix is going to be very, very stressful, and you probably will not improve as much as you would at other times of the year. year. It also means that we can use these October, November, and December tests as backups in case we want to take the test one more time or in case we get sick during August or something like that. I do not recommend making those your first tests because there's not much time if something goes wrong. Plus, in the fall of senior year, you're going to be dealing with college applications, so that's kind of messy. Now, going back to those in-school tests, again, I'm going to have to make another video to kind of explain this, but basically, for my students, I say that those are a good backup, and I make them sign up for the actual Saturday College Board administration of the March SAT. And then if their school makes them take another test in March and April, so be it. We have it as a backup, but it tends to kind of overlap with a little bit of spring break. And so what people are studying or not studying during spring break and then taking the test when they come back, and it just makes me nervous. So generally speaking, I like those as a backup for my students, but also if you are unsure if you want to take the SAT, it's a free test, so it can help you decide what to do later if you want to take the August test as a second test. But I still recommend, no matter what, do a little bit of preparation beforehand. Like I said, I've got a strategy series that's 10 episodes and it's really quick and it'll hit the highlights for you. So I definitely recommend that. And that can be part of your test prep strategy. There are basically 3 ways to do it. You can study on your own, you can take a prep class, or you can get a private tutor. The thing with self-studying is it's basically free. Maybe you buy a textbook of some kind, but you can definitely get a lot of great stuff off of Khan Academy. They have a partnership with the College Board, so it's pretty good. I also definitely think my channel is great. It's got a lot of great practice questions and videos that you can use. My big 2 pieces of advice, though, for self-studying: set a schedule so that you don't fall behind, because if you just say you'll practice when you have free time, you'll never have free time and you'll never practice. So set a schedule when you start so that you can have something to stick to. And then the practice tests are limited. The College Board's Blue Book app only has a handful. So if you just do all those right away at the beginning, you're going to have nothing else. So you got to plan that ahead. Again, I will have a separate video that specifically outlines what I think self-studying should look like. So I recommend that you subscribe to my channel and watch that. If you're going to take a prep class, look at some of the big companies, look at some local tutoring services, some small businesses. My advice there is ask them how they handle outliers, people who are scoring really high or really low. You don't want to be bored or confused in a class, so think about how the classes are organized. If they're organized by score, you might be okay. And also, if you are taking a class, you can't just sit in the back of the room. Do the homework. Make sure that you're actually trying to improve your score. If you just show up for an hour, it's not going to improve your score that much. You got to do the work. For private tutoring, I recommend finding someone who has SAT experience. You can ask around, or you can ask me. I do work with a limited number of private tutoring students every year. You can find my rates and availability on my website. But regardless, again, if you find someone who has good SAT experience and they tell you to do some work, do the homework. That stuff matters. The only way to improve is to build new habits. And so that takes more than just one meeting a week. So you've got to make sure that if someone is assigning you homework, you actually take it seriously and do it. Hopefully all of this answered these 3 questions for you. Just to review, should you take the SAT? I think yes. If you are starting at a PSAT above 1200, you're probably going to do well on the SAT. If it's less than that, then decide, what is your schedule like? How busy are you? How hard is it to keep your grades up? Those things might help you determine whether or not an SAT is a good use of your time. If you are going to take the SAT, I recommend that you use the March and August SAT dates because they tend to have the lightest surrounding schedule. But think about when you're free. If you do the high school play in February and you're not going to be able to study before that March SAT, then that is not a good date for you. And when you do decide to take it, make sure you prepare. There are tons of resources out there. Plenty of them are free. There's really no excuse. But whatever you do, pick a plan early and stick to it. Make sure you do not leave this to the last minute. This is not a test that you can cram for. So if you have more questions, please comment in the video here. You can also, like I said, subscribe to my channel. I have more videos that go into more detail, and my site also has tons of information and resources as well. And it also gives you information about the limited amount of private tutoring I do every year, my rates, my availability, my philosophy, all of that stuff. For now, though, I hope that this video helped. It helped get the ball rolling so that you can have a plan in place. Thank you for watching and subscribing. I'm Mike Settele, the founder of Settele Tutoring. And remember, when it comes to your scores, don't settle for less. Settele for more.